Lady from the state of Wyoming, Ms. Hageman.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. It is a privilege to serve on this select subcommittee, and I look forward to the work we have ahead of us. After over 30 years as a water, natural resource, and constitutional attorney, I have seen firsthand and fought against the weaponization of the federal government against my fellow Wyoming citizens and the country at large. Through the testimony of our witnesses today and the points made by my colleagues, it is clear that the culture and mission of the FBI and DOJ has changed in a manner which runs counter to the rights and liberties of the American people. The purpose of government is to secure our natural rights. Yet the testimony we have heard and the information received from the whistleblowers and other investigative findings has shown that the FBI's mission has moved from securing those rights to using them as a predicate for investigating and surveilling the American people and weaponizing their government structure against them. Mr. Baker, in a Wall Street Journal piece you wrote titled, "The FBI Needs a Ray of Courage," you stated that in response to Attorney General Garland's memoranda directing the targeting of American parents, Director Wray should respond by highlighting that the FBI won't undertake any investigation based on speech alone. It is troubling that that statement would even need to be made. But Mr. Baker, do you think your advice was heeded by Director Wray?
In fact, I remember that episode quite clearly. I wrote that article in October, just days after the announcement became public, and I was in touch with high executives at the FBI a day or two after that. They assured me that the FBI would maintain the standard of only investigating those situations where there was violence and not investigating free speech. I have to accept the ranking members of the FBI who told me that. However, my article in the Wall Street Journal still stands. We needed, the FBI needed, the American people needed to hear Director Wray say that publicly, as other FBI directors have spoke up to previous attorney generals and previous presidents, and he never did publicly. And the American people needed to hear, we wouldn't be having this discussion today if he clearly stated that we will not investigate speech, we'll only investigate violence. We're still waiting for that statement.
Okay. Mr. Turley, from what Mr. Baker just said, we have seen two issues stemming from this abuse and change of priorities within the FBI and DOJ. They are either investigating Americans based upon their constitutionally protected rights, or they are flagging lawful action to which they have political objection. In some of your recent writings, you have identified two very important points from the revelation of the FBI Twitter relationship. First, that this relationship is a First Amendment violation as it constitutes censorship by surrogate or proxy. And second, you also are concerned that you don't know what is more menacing, the role the FBI played in Twitter's censorship program or its response to the disclosure of that role. The Constitution is a limited governance document. The First Amendment identified our God-given right to speak freely and imposes restraint that the government shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Mr. Turley, can you explain the implications of the government relying on private industry to circumvent the First Amendment?
Thank you for that question. The Supreme Court and lower courts have spent a great deal of time trying to define when a relationship with a private party can cross over to a type of agency relationship. And that also applies on the state level through the 14th Amendment. In cases like Page, for example, you have situations where you have a government official who called an employer to say, I don't like what this person said in a public meeting, and that employee was fired. And the court said, you know, that is government action. That is a violation of the First Amendment. One of the things that this subcommittee has to deal with is that difficult line, and I admit it is difficult. But in these Twitter files, there's a very disturbing picture that emerges. You have regular meetings between the FBI and Twitter. They even offered to give clearances to Twitter officials. You have complaints among Twitter employees that this is overwhelming in terms of the number. And what you really see is how insatiable censorship becomes, that eventually they were doing what appeared to be word searches and just sending all of these postings in for possible action by Twitter. And that included things like jokes and other things that anyone looking at it would realize that this is not a nefarious Russian operation. So when we talk about surrogate censorship, we're talking about one of the most serious threats against free speech. You know, people always say, well, you know, the First Amendment only applies to the government. The First Amendment is not synonymous with free speech. It deals with one problem of free speech. What we're talking about with surrogate censorship is a much greater problem for those of us who value free speech as a defining right of this country.
I appreciate that. And one more point to make, they also paid
Sorry,
Twitter
the
millions of
gentlelady's
dollars.
time has expired.
I will yield back.